She stood in the hallway, barefoot, wrapped in an oversized robe that hung off one shoulder. Steam drifted lazily from her tea as she leaned against the doorframe, watching me from the other end of the house. I was kneeling by the bookshelf, pretending to skim titles, but really, I was listening to the silence, the kind that hums between two people when something unspoken has started to bloom. "You always wait for me to leave the room before looking," she said, not accusing, not smiling, just honest. And in that moment, I didn't look away. I let it sit between us, that quiet dare, that reckless acknowledgement. She didn't step forward. I didn't speak. But the space between us felt smaller than it had ever been. I was 26 when I moved into the guest house behind the grand home. It was part of a last-minute rental deal through a friend of a friend, and I hadn't even met the owners until the day I arrived with 2 duffel bags and a box of mismatched kitchenware. The guest house was a renovated pool cabana, wood-paneled walls, a little kitchenette, just enough space for someone in between lives. I'd left Chicago a few months earlier. I told people I needed a change, but the truth was more brittle than that. My dad had passed unexpectedly, and after the funeral, I'd found it impossible to return to the version of myself that existed before. So I drifted west, somewhere quieter. The Grants were polite and a little distant, the kind of upper-middle-class family that knew how to offer hospitality without intimacy. The husband, Arthur, worked in finance and traveled often. Their son, Ryan, was in college up north. That left the house mostly to her. Julia Grant. The first time I saw her, she was trimming dead roses along the back fence. Her hair was tied back in a soft knot, streaks of silver catching the light. She wore jeans and a pale blue linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up. From a distance, she didn't look much older than 35, but up close, the lines at the corners of her eyes told a different story, not of age exactly, but of stillness, of someone who had learned to carry herself without apology. She looked up when I came out to take the trash to the curb. "You must be Eli," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt." She smiled, warm but measured. "You're not interrupting. Just trying to keep these alive. They don't like this heat." I offered some half-joke about not having a green thumb, and she chuckled lightly before standing. "Let me know if you need anything in the main house," she said. "You're welcome to the laundry machines. Just knock first." "Thanks. I appreciate it." She nodded, then turned back to her roses. I lingered a second too long before heading back inside. That was how it started, little things. Exchanges that felt like polite routines. I'd pass her in the yard or see her through the glass door, reading at the kitchen table, always with a cup of tea. Sometimes I'd offer to bring in a package or move the trash cans, just to have a reason to stand near her a few minutes longer. There was nothing inappropriate, nothing even suggestive. But there was a quiet undercurrent I couldn't quite name, a steadiness in her presence that made the air feel clearer. 2 weeks in, she invited me up for dinner. "Ryan's away. Arthur's delayed. I made too much soup," she said over the fence. "No pressure. Just, if you're tired of frozen pizza." That night, we sat in her kitchen, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the distant ticking of an antique wall clock. She poured wine into wide glasses and asked me questions, not the kind you ask out of politeness, but the kind you ask because you're actually listening to the answers. We talked about books. I told her I was a failed fiction writer turned part-time editor. She told me she used to teach literature before she had Ryan. She had this way of laughing without sound, just a widening of the eyes and the soft tilt of her head. At one point, I looked down and realized I hadn't touched my spoon in 10 minutes. She was watching me, and for the first time, she didn't look away when our eyes met. The silence between us stretched just long enough to be noticeable. Not awkward, not tense, just full. She cleared her throat gently and pushed the salt shaker toward me. "You forgot to season your soup," she said. I smiled, but it didn't break the weight in my chest. Later that night, back in the guest house, I couldn't sleep. Not because I'd fallen in love, it wasn't that. Not yet. But because something inside me had shifted. And I knew, in that quiet, undeniable way you know when rain is coming, that this wasn't just a place I was staying. This was the beginning of something I shouldn't want, but already did. The days after that dinner folded back into routine, but not quite. Julia didn't mention the evening again, and I didn't bring it up. Still, something lingered. A new rhythm. The kind where small things mean more than they should. The pause when she waved from her garden, the quiet way her eyes found mine through the kitchen window. I told myself it was just the intimacy of proximity. Living 20 feet from someone's back door makes you notice them. Their habits, their shadows in the window at night. Their laugh, muted through the screen when they talk on the phone. I tried to stay out of the way. But then came the rain. A late September thunderstorm rolled in out of nowhere, catching me mid-walk back from the corner store. I sprinted through the last block, groceries pressed to my chest like a child holding books. By the time I made it to the yard, I was soaked. She opened the back door before I could even pull out my key. "Jesus, Eli," she said, stepping onto the patio. "Come in. You're drenched." "I'm fine," I said, laughing, shaking water from my hair. She stood there, hands on her hips, the porch light framing her in soft gold. "Don't be ridiculous. Bring your things and come inside. I'll grab a towel." I hesitated. She saw it. "It's just a towel," she added, quieter. Then she turned. I followed. She handed me an old university sweatshirt and a clean towel. I changed in the downstairs bathroom, steam rising from the heater vents as thunder rolled outside. When I came out, she was in the living room, barefoot, curled into the corner of the couch with a glass of white wine in one hand and a second glass on the table in front of the empty cushion beside her. "For the trauma," she said dryly, nodding toward the wine. "I'll need years of therapy," I said, sitting down carefully. The rain beat softly against the windows. For a while, we talked about nothing. Books again. The mess of politics. She told me about her father's bookstore in Boston and the way it used to smell, old paper and dust and something floral, like lavender her mother would sprinkle in the corners. At one point, I asked why she stopped teaching. Her face tightened. "Barely. I didn't," she said. "It just changed. When Arthur got his promotion, we moved. And then it became easier to step back than to start over." I didn't know what to say, but she didn't seem to want comfort, just acknowledgement. "I miss it," she added quietly, eyes on the glass. "Being needed in a room." "You're still needed," I said. Too quickly. Her eyes met mine. Still. Direct. Like a hand pressed gently over a bruise. We didn't speak after that. We just sat. Not touching. Not saying anything that crossed a line. But there was something in the quiet that felt charged, like two people standing on opposite sides of a closed door, listening for footsteps. When the rain slowed, I stood. "Thanks," I said. "For the wine. The towel. Everything." She walked me to the door, arms folded. Her expression unreadable. As I stepped outside, she said, "Eli." I turned. "You're easy to talk to." I gave a small nod. "So are you." Then the door clicked softly shut. Back in the guest house, I dried my hair, changed into dry clothes, and lay on the couch staring at the ceiling. Her sweatshirt still clung faintly to my skin, a trace of lavender, maybe. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I replayed every glance, every breath between our words. Not because I thought it meant anything, not yet, but because I couldn't help it. And because the silence between us had started to feel like a language. When I desperately wanted to learn, I started finding reasons to stay busy outside. Useless ones. Rearranging the small tool shed behind the guest house. Washing my car even when it was clean. Bringing in the mail just a little too early. And every now and then, she would appear on the patio watering plants that didn't need water, or wandering out barefoot with a book in hand, pretending to look for sun. We became familiar strangers. Each morning, a nod. Some days, a wave. Small exchanges that didn't acknowledge what was building quietly beneath it all. Then one Sunday morning, she surprised me. I was outside, messing with a crooked fence post, when her voice floated down from the second-story balcony. "Do you drink coffee?" I looked up. She was leaning on the railing, robe tied loosely at the waist, mug in hand. "I live in America," I said, shielding my eyes. "So yeah." Religiously. She smiled, tilted her head. "Come by then." I made too much. By the time I knocked on the back door, she was already walking back to the kitchen. She poured mine without asking how I took it. Black, just like hers. "Outside," she said. We sat on the back steps, both holding mugs, the late morning sun soaking through the trees. For a while, we just sipped. Birds chirped distantly. A lawn mower buzzed a few blocks over. Then she asked it, casually, but not carelessly. "Why did you leave Chicago?" I didn't answer right away. I practiced a version of the story for small talk, one that sounded responsible and logical. But something about her presence made dishonesty feel pointless. "My dad died," I said softly. "Heart attack. No warning. He just dropped one afternoon in the middle of his studio. He was a jazz musician." Her face softened. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," I said. I couldn't stay. The apartment felt like a mausoleum. Every time I touched something, it felt like I was ruining whatever version of it he last touched. She nodded. not rushing to speak. I kept going. I didn't come here to heal. That wasn't the plan. I just needed somewhere quiet. I guess I thought if I went far enough, I'd outrun the echo. We were silent for a moment, both staring at the middle distance. He would have liked it here, I added. It's the kind of quiet that makes room for thinking. Then she said, my mother died young. Cancer. I was 19. I used to think if I could build a perfect life, the right husband, the right home, the right routine, that it would make me safe from things like that. Did it? She shook her head, laughed once. Not even close. There was something unbearably intimate about the moment. The kind of intimacy that doesn't come from touch, but from sharing the small, sharp griefs we don't let others see. You don't talk like someone your age, she said after a while. You don't look like someone yours. Her eyes met mine. Steady. Not flirtatious. Not flattered. Just locked in. I mean that respectfully, I added. I know you do. Another silence. Then she stood slowly, brushed non-existent dust from her robe. Well, I should get dressed. Of course. She opened the door, stepped halfway inside, then paused. You never told me what you're writing, she said. I blinked. Who said I'm writing? She looked over her shoulder, a small knowing smile playing at the edge of her mouth. You carry yourself like someone who edits his own thoughts before speaking. That's a writer's habit. I didn't answer. She waited a beat, then disappeared into the house. And I sat there, the mug still warm in my hands, wondering how she always managed to see more of me than I offered, wondering if I was doing the same to her. She invited me to dinner again the following Friday. No occasion, no excuse. Just a text. If you're not busy tonight, I'm making lemon risotto. Come by at 7. I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. Wouldn't miss it. The sun was still up when I knocked. She answered in bare feet and a slate gray sweater dress that clung to her in a way that felt accidental. Or maybe not. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling around her face like she'd stopped caring halfway through getting ready. She looked stunning without trying. That was always the thing. She never seemed like she was trying. Hi, she said, voice soft. Hi, I echoed. I was holding a bottle of wine I'd biked halfway across town to find. It wasn't expensive, but I'd read the label like it was an exam, trying to pick something that felt like I'd put thought into it. She smiled when she saw it. You didn't have to. I know, I said. I wanted to. We ate by the big window overlooking the yard. Late summer light spilled through the glass, catching on the rim of her wine glass, the soft curve of her collarbone. We talked about small things, then quiet things, then nothing at all. It was one of those silences you don't try to fill. After dinner, we moved to the couch. She sat at one end, tucking her feet beneath her. I took the other. Not close, not far. At one point, she asked, "Are you lonely?" The question landed heavier than I expected. Maybe because it wasn't framed as small talk. Sometimes, I admitted. More lately. But I think I've always been a little lonely. Even around people. She nodded like she knew the feeling. It's different, isn't it? Being alone and being lonely. Yeah, I said. One is quiet. The other is empty. She sipped her wine, then set it down. I used to be good at empty. I'd fill it with appointments, errands, routines. Now it just echoes. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the thinnest thread of ache beneath it. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just watched her, trying not to let it show how much I wanted to close the space between us. Then she did something small. Barely anything. She reached for the blanket draped over the couch, and, as she pulled it over her legs, it brushed against mine. She didn't apologize. Didn't pull it back. Instead, she looked at me. Her expression wasn't invitation. It wasn't resistance either. It was a question she wasn't going to ask out loud. And I sat with it. I didn't reach out. I didn't close the gap. But I didn't look away. We sat like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, the wine ran out. She glanced at the clock and gave a quiet sigh. I didn't mean for it to get this late. I don't mind, I said. She hesitated, then stood. I should go to bed. I stood too. Of course. At the door, she paused again. I expected her to say something. Instead, she just looked at me. That same calm, unreadable stare. The kind of look you give when you're deciding whether or not to open a locked drawer. Good night, Eli, she said. Good night, Julia. And that was it. But later, back in my guest house, I realized something had changed. Not just between us, but in me. I no longer wanted her in the abstract, in the soft glances and invisible edges of our days. I wanted to know her. Not in the way people mean when they want possession or fantasy. but in the quiet, everyday way. The ordinary, impossible way. I wanted to know who she was when no one else was looking, and I wanted her to know me back. By mid-October, the air had shifted. You could feel it in the wind, crisp and dry, pulling at the corners of the day. The light was different too, less forgiving, more golden and tired, like the year itself was exhaling. Julia's husband hadn't been home in over 2 weeks. A work trip, she'd said. New York, then Toronto. Back-to-back meetings, some conference he couldn't miss. She said it without bitterness, without much of anything, really. One evening, I saw her walking the length of the yard with her phone pressed to her ear, head tilted back slightly, eyes on the tree line. I was sitting on the porch of the guest house, not meaning to eavesdrop, but close enough to hear the silence on her end of the call. She hung up after a minute and didn't move. Just stood there, her back to me, hands loose at her sides like she'd forgotten they belonged to her. Later, she texted, "You up?" I replied immediately, "Yeah, no reason. Just couldn't sleep. Good night." I stared at the screen long after it went dark. The next afternoon, she knocked on the door of the guest house. She had a book in one hand and a bag of oranges in the other. "I'm making tea," she said. "Come read with me." It wasn't a question. We sat on the sun-warmed patio, a thick-knit blanket draped across our laps. The tea was chamomile with slices of orange floating on top. She peeled one and handed me a segment without looking up from her page. Our fingers brushed. Nothing more. The moment lasted longer than it should have. "Can I ask you something?" I said, setting down my mug. She didn't look away from the book. "You can always ask. Do you think we're doing something wrong?" That made her pause. She closed the book, folding her hand around the spine. "We haven't done anything," she said quietly. "Not yet." That got her to look at me. Her eyes were calm, but there was something behind them, something fraying. "I don't want to ruin this," she said. "Whatever this is, even the quiet of it." I nodded, slowly. "Me neither." She reached for another orange, peeled it with slow fingers. "I think about you too much," she said, voice barely audible. "I know," I said. "Me too." We didn't kiss. We didn't touch. But something broke open between us in that moment, soft and irreversible. A confession spoken in restraint. The next few days, everything felt sharper. Every glance carried weight. Every word between us was loaded with what wasn't being said. I saw her brushing her hair in the kitchen window, and it felt intimate. I heard her laugh on the phone, and it made my chest ache. Then came the evening she left a note by my door. "Fire pit at 8. Bring your coat." When I stepped outside, she was already there, seated on the low stone wall with a blanket around her shoulders, flames flickering in her eyes. The air smelled of pine smoke and citrus. "I miss this," she said as I sat beside her, just sitting with someone and saying nothing. The fire cracked between us. Shadows danced across her face. "You're easy to sit beside," I said. She turned to me, her profile etched in firelight. "I'm scared of what happens next." "Me too, but I still want to be here." Then be here. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was warm. It was gravity. She reached for my hand beneath the blanket. Not bold, not trembling, just certain. And I held it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. The first frost came overnight. The windows fogged with breath, and the morning light seemed slower to rise. I woke to a silence that felt different. Not empty, more like something holding its breath. That day, she didn't text. I didn't see her outside. By late afternoon, I walked up to the house, knocked lightly on the back door. No answer, but the door was unlocked. I found her in the living room, seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by old photo albums. She looked up when she heard me but didn't smile. Her eyes were soft. "Tired. I was going through things," she said. "It's silly. I never look at these." I knelt beside her. One album was open in her lap, photos of her and Arthur from years ago. Europe, maybe. A beach. Their faces still new to each other. Hopeful. "I forgot what I used to look like," she whispered. "You look the same." She gave a faint laugh. "That's kind, but no, I don't." I didn't argue. I just watched her fingers trace a younger version of herself on glossy paper. After a while, she closed the album and folded her hands in her lap. "I told Arthur not to rush back," she said. "He offered." I told him I was fine. She wasn't looking at me, but I could feel her words were meant for both of us. "I think," she continued, "that I let my life shrink without realizing it. One small choice at a time. Until there was nothing left that belonged only to me." I sat back, legs stretched out on the rug. "You still have time. You could start again." She turned then, really turned, and looked at me in that way she did when she was about to say something that would change something. I think this, whatever we've built here, is the first thing in a long time that felt like mine. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the only thing I could. It's not just yours. And then she kissed me. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't testing. It was real, quiet, earnest. Not the kiss of a mistake, but the kiss of two people finally admitting they had run out of reasons to pretend they weren't drawn to each other. Her hand cupped the side of my face like she was memorizing it. My fingers slipped gently around her wrist. The room didn't vanish. Nothing disappeared. The photo album stayed open. The past stayed heavy. But for a moment, it didn't matter. When we pulled apart, she didn't let go. Her forehead rested against mine. We stayed like that, suspended. I can't keep this going, she whispered. Not without hurting more people. I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. But I needed you to know. I needed it to be real. Just once. It was, I said, my voice raw. It is. She kissed my cheek, then stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain slightly aside. Outside, the yard was beginning to frost over. The trees bare and still. When you leave here, she said, without turning, don't look back for me. I'll be all right. But I want you to find something that's yours too. I stood slowly. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't turn this into something it shouldn't be. Something heavier than it already was. So I walked to the door. I paused, one hand on the frame. You were mine, Julia, I said quietly, even if just for a little while. She didn't answer, but I saw her hand move, just the smallest wave, barely a motion at all. And I left. That winter, I moved north, found a small apartment above a bookstore, and started teaching part-time writing workshops. On the surface, nothing much changed, but something in me had been altered, softened, and burned. Both. Some nights, when the snow piled high and the street lamps made halos in the fog, I'd sit by the window and think of her. Not with pain, not with regret, just with the kind of aching gratitude that stays with you after someone sees you, truly sees you, and still chooses to sit beside you anyway. She was a chapter, a quiet one, beautiful, undeniable, and I'll carry her in the margins for the rest of my life.